To understand light and shadows contrast, let's quickly recap on the studied material. Specifically, we learned that light and shadows contrast gives volume within the scene. It is a basic form of contrast for achieving volume within any image. To learn how to use it, let's consider several practical tools to work with light and shadows. For working with lighting, you will need a lighting source. This can be natural light or artificial light. For working with shadows, you will need a dimly lit space where you don't have bright reflections of light. Alternatively, you will need blackout textile, which will allow you to block light. Also, you may need this blackout textile if the scene you are shooting has some reflective sources, such as a shiny floor, white walls, or glass, and so on and so forth. Let's create light and shadows contrast for middle and long shots of a scene. For example, I'm using 2 cold LED and 2 warm lighting sources. These are Godox VL300s, Aperture 300Ds, and ACE 650 watts. As an exercise, we have the typical apartment interior. I'm analysing this scene and noticing that there are 2 key light sources. They are the light from the window, as well as a top-down practical ceiling light. The first step is turning off the top-down practical light, because this looks very cheap, giving bad, low fill light, and it just interferes with what we are trying to achieve, which is control. Okay, now I try to close the curtains so that the light still remains in the scene, but also looks good. I do it to my taste. I need the fill light from the window to motivate the additional light that I will turn on in the future. First, let's turn on our main lighting, the key light. The key light here stands off to the side of the camera. I avoid using the key light from front on because when it's placed to the side, it creates areas of light and shadows on our subject. It's important not to forget about the background. It also needs to be worked to create light and shadows, just like our subject. I have to control this light so that it will not fill in all the background and make it look flat. To control this, I'm using black flags, which allows me to get a gradient of light on the background. The closer the flags are to the source, the smoother the blur between shadow and light is. The further, the sharper the shadows are. I'm making a smooth gradient of light and shadows. And here is the outcome. I have a shot with light and shadows contrast. This method looks very simple, so let's go forward and look at a more difficult example. To complete the scene, we are filling the space within the frame with props and decorations, which makes it look more volumetric and not so bland. As you can see, in this scene we use light and shadows contrast too. We put an ARRI 1200 HMI outside the window and made it our key light. I created the close-up shot with soft diffusion cloth because in this scene the REHMI has a very hard light, which isn't always flattering for close-up shots. In this scene, I got light and shadows contrast utilising a top light. The top light in this scene is from the Godox 300 VL, with a softbox attached via a Boom Junior Grip arm. In this location there is a little cheat. The dressing room had a cool LED background light. The overhead light is not directly on the character, rather it's only about 30%. If the light is hanging directly over her, then she will be too bright and will have a hard light on her, which again isn't always flattering. So, let's look at how this scene looks with no lights. I'll turn off the overhead light, I'll turn off the fill light, and finally I'll turn off the background light. This is what the scene looks like without lights and with a raised exposure on the camera. This is the scene with background light and the scene with only the top light. Since I was lucky with the lighting from the wardrobe, let's forget about it and make our image more volumetric with another light source. For this, I'll use the Ace 650 watt with a dimmer for the backlight. As you can see, the main principles of light and shadow contrast is showing the light and dark areas within the scene. And more often than that, this contrast is obtained when you place the light source to the side and not from the same angle as the camera. You can use any light setups, top light, key light, low key light. Any light and shadows combination gives you volume in the scene, as the objects within the frame have dark and light sides. Because I'm using a fill light, the scene doesn't have a high contrast ratio. For this scene, I'm using the Godox 300 watt LED light. The light is fitted with softbox as well as a honeycomb grid for more direction from the light. I added a little bit of haze as well for some more volume within the scene. As for the backlight, I'm using a halogen light source of 650 watts with a dimmer too. I set this dimmer to half the power of the source because a clean 650 watt halogen has a very bright light, which would be too much for this scene, especially considering the camera setting and the aperture on the lens. And we still have the contrast of light. Now, let's look at how my students handled this contrast technique.